Hello and welcome to the No One Asked You podcast. I'm reading The Wheel of Time for the first time and sharing the experience with you. This is One Good Turn, The Eye of the World, and today I'm covering Chapter 1. So I was listening back to the last episode, and there was something I was trying to articulate, and I don't think I did it quite as well as I would like. I used the phrase high-minded a lot, and what I was trying to get at was more of a conceptual thing. For this episode, in my notes, particularly as we open on the chapter, the wheel of time turns and ages come to pass, leaving memories that become legend. I have the question, is there a literal wheel or is it a metaphor? So that's kind of what I was trying to get at in the last chapter, which is what is literal and what is metaphor? How are we to interpret much of what we are being told? In a book that starts off with a lot of very heady, metaphorical, conceptual elements, particularly in a fantasy where you're not quite sure what can or cannot be literal, I like to have that grounding influence for myself right in the beginning. And I'm not complaining by any means about this book on that front. It's just something about my personal taste, and it evokes the question, is there a literal wheel? And that is something that I would like to know. So that said, the thing I expected to happen in Chapter 1, I guess doesn't happen in Chapter 1. I'm still expecting it, though. And for clarity, I've basically heard that the town gets destroyed or attacked in some meaningful way, and I guess the main characters manage to escape with one of the Aes Sedai. That's kind of where I'm under the impression things head. But I guess that's going to come a little later. So we continue on with the lengthy setting description right at the beginning of the chapter. I get the sense that this opening is probably quite iconic. Is that the right word? For this book, particularly because it directly addresses the Wheel of Time. The Wheel of Time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. We get a short description of the terrain, sand hills, two rivers, breaking of the world quarry road. The name Two Rivers kind of jumped out at me this particular go-around, in that knowing that there's such an emphasis on male and female, I think anytime I see something in pairs, like two rivers, I imagine there could be some sort of symbolic connection there, particularly if here in this area the Dragon Reborn is coming, and if, as I assume, there will be a female counterpart to the Dragon Reborn, just as well that they come from a place where there's something called Two Rivers. This is taking place from Rand al'Thor's POV, and knowing what I know regarding the Dragon Reborn, I think that seems entirely appropriate. And we learn quick enough that the weather is, the season, the winter season, is lasting longer than it is supposed to be. It's very much a topic in this chapter that it's supposed to be spring, but the world still seems to think that it's winter. There's a certain degree of ominousness to it. And I really sat in, the more I go through all of these books that I want to read and have always wanted to read and so on, it seems very common to be using weather and winter in such a way as to create an ominous danger, some sort of wrongness in the world. Obviously, with Game of Thrones, we have winter is coming, and the strange seasons, the cycles with the uniquely long winters. We get a similar thing in the Dragonbone Chair with a very long drought into a very bad winter. If I recall correctly, it's been a little while since I read that. We've got an emphasis on Way of Kings, considering where I'm at in that currently, in the flashback when Dalinar goes to Feverstone Keep and they're complaining about winter being uniquely long. And then that occurs, I think, something similar to that occurs rather in a Kaladin chapter. So I know that there are other books that do this. It just really sank into me how common the use of winter in this way is. So Rand and his father are traveling to the Wine Spring Inn with apple cider and hard cider in celebration of Beltane, which I guess is the spring festival, essentially, even though it doesn't feel very much like spring. And I highlighted the line, "With a guilty start, Rand returned to watching his side of the road, Tam's matter-of-factness reminding him of his task. He was a head taller than his father, taller than anyone else in the district, and had little of Tam in him physically, except perhaps for a breadth of shoulder." Again, that's a little bit of a clue that Rand's genealogy may not be from the area. In fact, I think it goes on a little bit later in the chapter to talk about his mother as being an outlander or something like that. But as Rand is traveling, he feels, it's not quite right, I think, to say eyes upon him, at least not at first, but he feels unsettled. And part of it is the weather, but there's something else going on. And he has his bow out, and he turns around at one point and he sees something that deeply unnerves him, deeply unsettles him. He glanced over his shoulder and blinked. Not more than 20 spans back down the road, a cloaked figure on horseback followed them, horse and rider alike, black, dull, and ungleaming. The rider's cloak covered him to his boot tops, the cowl tugged well forward so no part of him showed. Vaguely, Rand thought there was something odd about the horseman, but it was the shadowed opening of the hood that fascinated him. He could see only the vaguest outlines of a face, but he had the feeling he was looking right into the rider's eyes, and he could not look away. And it will go on a little bit later to note that despite the fact that even though the weather is a bit blustery, this black figure's cloak isn't rustling in the wind at all, which I think would be fairly disconcerting to see. Naturally, my mind goes to, is this the betrayer? Checking out potential dragons reborn. Again, I reflect on the question I asked in the last chapter, which is, if this is a new turn, is it Elan specifically that the Dragon Reborn will have to deal with? Or is this just one of a Nazgul, one of several scary creatures out there? I highlighted, there was only shadow to see in the hood, but he felt hatred as sharply as if he could see a snarling face. Hatred for everything that lived, hatred for him most of all, for him above all things. And at this point, he trips on a rock or something. He manages to tear his gaze away from this creature, and when he looks back, the creature is gone. And seeing something that hated him so much adds to his disconcerting feeling here, because he thinks that he's never felt such anger directed at him, such hatred. Rand collects himself after having essentially stumbled, and he mentions having seen someone to his dad, to Tam, and throughout this whole interaction, I'm asking myself, what does Tam know? What doesn't he know? Because as far as we can tell, Tam is playing it off as if he doesn't know, and Rand doesn't disbelieve that. I think there's a few lines where he wonders, but he really does trust his father. But to me, Tam seems like the kind of guy that knows things, you know what I mean? So I want to know, like, if it's one of those situations where you can't talk about it, if you say the name, it draws his attention kind of a thing. I want to know if Tam just doesn't want to burden Rand with specific knowledge that he's perhaps waiting for Rand to age up a bit first about before sharing, or if he simply just doesn't know. So then we get Rand looking around for a bit, and we learn more about the territory, Sand Hills, Emmons Field, Two Rivers, and what sort of the general opinion of the folks of Emmons Hill think of these areas. The mountains of mist, And we get that Rand has two close friends, his closest friends, Matt Cawthon and Perrin Ibarra. It seems the three of them are a little bit of an adventurous group. They go a little further afield than most people tend to go. Watch Hill, Devon ride. Tam offers to keep an eye out for this mysterious figure that Rand saw, but Rand's scared, and so he says, no, let's just keep going. Tam brings up Egwene. I expect you're eager to see Egwene. And I wrote about a specific line. Of all things he might want to think about right then, the mayor's daughter was far down the list. I wrote down, oof. A part of me imagined in this moment Egwene having a crush on Rand and it making Rand uncomfortable. But then I thought back to the Ravens chapter, particularly because of Egwene's personality. But then again, in that chapter, she had a crush on Perrin. So then I was wondering, well, is this a marriage thing? Does she keep talking as if they're going to get married? Is she pushy in that way? I don't know. We do end up, I think, getting an answer for why he doesn't want to think about Egwene later. It's cute, but we'll get to that. For the time being, he does not want to think about her. And he ruminates on the hatred, as I talked about a little while back. And then we get a couple of interesting passages because Tam notes that Rand seems disconcerted. So he says, remember the flame, lad, and the void. It was an odd thing Tam had taught him. Concentrate on a single flame and feed all your passions into it. Fear, hate, anger, until your mind became empty. Become one with the void, Tam said, and you could do anything. Nobody else in Emond's Field talked that way, but Tam won the archery competition at Beltane every year with his flame and his void. Rand thought he might have a chance at placing this year himself, if he could manage to hold on to the void. For Tam to bring it up now meant he had noticed, but he said nothing more about it. That had noticed, I think, was about him feeling disconcerted or embarrassed about Egwene, more so than had noticed the strange figure. I wrote down, magic, what does Tam know? So the part at the start of that, a single flame and feed all your passions into it, does seem a little reminiscent of when the dragon in the prologue chapter, Lews Therin, detonated the nuke, because he was viscerally screaming, crying for forgiveness, crying out for Ilyena, and he seems to be pouring everything into the power that he was calling upon. The other thing about that is the word void there. It's interesting to me. Flame is light. In this world, clearly light is good, or we're supposed to believe that at this point anyway. I think of Melisandre's the light needs shadow to shine brighter or something like that, or the light banishes the shadow. But I hear void and I think darkness. I think not good things. So I have some concern over what kind of magic would require voidish imagery. But maybe it's more supposed to be about focusing on the light in the darkness rather than the light and the darkness. Then my mind goes to balance. Things need balance. Lots to think about. So they get into the village, and there are children out and about playing, which is not unusual, but somewhat unusual considering the weather. So usually there would be kids out playing, except there haven't been because the weather has been so wintry, and that has caused a bear and other predators to attack cows and sheep and stuff. It has made travel much more difficult for people, and so the kids have essentially been not allowed out or too scared to go out of late. But with the town determined to celebrate Beltane regardless of the weather, they're out playing right now. And I am also wondering at this point what the weather has to do with the Dark One. Has he been released, or is his influence growing? Probably. The town is hard at work doing what they do in preparation for Beltane. And Tam stops every once in a while to have a brief conversation. Lots of people are concerned about the weather, and out comes a guy, Wit Congar. or possibly Copeland, or maybe a bit of both. There's some very gurmy stuff going on with those two particular families. But basically, these are the troublemakers of the town. And Tam kind of tries to politely get out of the conversation. And there was a quick passage that I wrote a few question marks by. He had been sprawled on his front steps, not up on his roof, though the thatch looked as if it badly needed Master Buey's attention. He never seemed ready to start over, or to finish what he started the first time. Most of the Copelands and Congers were like that, those who were not worse. And that last sentence, most of the Copelands and Congers were like that, those who were not worse, I thought was a bit strangely worded. It took a little bit for me to understand what was being said there. And I think I've had that experience a few times in the last two chapters, not frequently. Once was with Egwene when she was consoling her sister about not having a braid yet. And I think there was one moment in the last chapter as well. So just something to note about the prose. For the most part, I'm enjoying the prose tremendously. Just every once in a while, there's a sentence that I think, wait, what does that mean? It should be clear what that means, but what does it mean? And basically, Whitconger is complaining about Nynaeve, who is the wisdom now, I guess. She was wisdom in training in the last one. I think she is the wisdom now. And we essentially learn, one, that complaining about her seems to be a somewhat regular occurrence. It sounds like Nynaeve's not very popular in the town right now, although how much of that is her fault, it's hard to say. But basically, she said that winter would be gone soon and spring would come, and obviously winter is still here, so people think she's not very competent. So Wit is complaining. Wit's wife comes along and kind of berates Wit for complaining again about Nynaeve, or more specifically about the women's circle. There's a fun line later on, I'll try and remember to call it out, about the women's circle. But Tam takes the opportunity to sneak away from the conversation while Wit is getting berated by his wife. And Rand has some introspection here about, one, his dad is single, so a lot of women in the town try to fish for info from Rand and make suggestions to Rand. And then apparently recently they haven't just been doing this for Tam, but for Rand himself as well. And this seems to make Rand very uncomfortable. But Rand is polite as best he can be. He's not someone who likes to be impolite. And they get onto the green, which is the middle of the village, and it seems to be this large patch of grass. This particular day, the bulk of it is deadish brown. Again, we've got that sort of ominous winter. I can very much see why, in a small way, the Ravens chapter had been added, because this particular chapter walks a really fine line, I think, between trying to show us the town as the status quo moment you hear a lot about. And I feel like this first chapter is walking a fine line between showing us the status quo moment, invoking how it should look, but also having that this winter is here, it's unusual, something's not quite right element to it at the same time. It's very interesting, but the Ravens chapter really gave us that this is the town, this is life as normal, in a way that this chapter doesn't quite achieve. This chapter sort of straddles that line a little bit in an excellent way. I think it's effective, to be certain. We get a nice description of the wine spring. I guess the water is sweet. I don't know if it's like literally sweet or essentially just like really good water, but that stuck out to me. The Wagon Bridge, Terran Ferry, and Watch Hill, the Old Road, Devon Ride, lots of names. There was a funny little segment. Outsiders sometimes found it funny that the road had one name to the north and another to the south, but that was the way it had always been as far as anyone in Emmons Field knew, and that was that. I appreciated that. That was about a road that some people refer to as the North Road because of where they live, and the Old Road, again, because of where they live. A spring pole is being erected in preparation. I guess unmarried women dance and unmarried men sing. It's very cute. A lot of that world building. We're learning this culture, these festivals, and they get to the inn. One of the interesting things here, little bit of flavor. The inn has tiled roof, but all of the other buildings, I think, have thatch. Noteworthy, for me at least. And out comes the mayor, Bran Alvier, Egwin's father. The mayor says hi to the two of them, and before Rand can even respond, the mayor goes right to talking to Tam. Tam really cut it close in terms of getting the cider there on time, again because of the ominous weather. And Bran has been getting a lot of complaints about the weather, it seems, because he's kind of fed up about it. And Sen Buey comes up to complain, and he echoes what Wit was complaining about with Nynaeve. And that's where we get to that funny line I had mentioned earlier. The women's circle seem to object to the village council even talking about their business, though they interfere in ours whenever they want to, which is most of the time, or so it seems. And then he gets cut off, but that's pretty funny. Not such an unbelievable thing, I think. But he complains about Nynaeve as well. Nynaeve is having trouble explicitly stating when winter will end, and I guess she's developed this habit of like just storming off anytime someone brings it up with her. I imagine I think this winter thing is supernatural, so I imagine Nynaeve is probably reading the signs right. It's just that there's interference beyond her control, and I imagine she's probably embarrassed. Matt Cawthon sneaks up, so he's not seen by the other three, and he wants to get up to a bit of mischief with Rand. Basically, he and his friend managed to catch a badger, and they're gonna release it in the green where a bunch of the girls are, setting up that spring pole or whatever, and watch them all scream. General childhood shenanigans, but Rand promised to unload the barrels, and that's what he intends to do. So we're getting a lot of really nice, likable qualities from Rand. I'm trying to sort of imagine in my mind what it would be like to read this chapter without having read Ravens, and so far he seems like a good old upstanding boy. And then Matt mentions, well, I know of better things than a badger. We have strangers in the two rivers. And one of the big things to note here is he says strangers. So building on what I know about this book going into it, I think that there are going to be two outsiders. I think one is an Aes Sedai named Moira, and I think Moira has some sort of loyal guard or a partner of some kind, as best I remember. The details are a bit hazy. So when I first read that, I kind of presumed that was them. And it's noteworthy he does here say plural, strangers, because Rand interjects at that moment. He says, a man on horseback, a man in a black cloak on a black horse, and the cloak doesn't move in the wind. And Matt swallows his grin, and his voice drops, and he says, you saw him too? I thought I was the only one. Don't laugh, Rand, but he scared me. So I don't think that figure is who Matt was referencing. Even if I didn't know about Moira and the bodyguard or whoever she travels with, I did not think he was referencing that black cloaked figure. And for the most part, who the strangers he is referencing kind of fades away into discussion about the black cloaked figure. So that's just noteworthy. But Matt goes on a little bit about the figure. Rand talks about how the figure seemed to hate him, and Matt doesn't quite get that. But he says, well, I looked away just for a moment. It wasn't easy, mind you. Then when I looked back, he'd vanished. Blood and ashes. 3 days it's been, and I can hardly stop thinking about him. I keep looking over my shoulder. Matt attempted a laugh that came out as a croak. Funny how being scared takes you. You think strange things. I actually thought, just for a minute, mind, it might be the Dark One. He tried another laugh, but no sound at all came out this time. This does a good job of making things feel ominous. This suggests to me that Rand and Matt are likely both candidates, if you will, for the Dragon Reborn. The fact that they can both see this thing, because I think this thing's evil. I think it's, Elon, frankly. It goes on to say, Rand took a deep breath, as much to remind himself as for any other reason he said by rote. The Dark One and all of the Forsaken are bound in Shaiol Ghul, beyond the Great Blight, bound by the Creator at the moment of creation, bound until the end of time. The hand of the Creator shelters the world, and the light shines on us all. And I wrote a note to myself, no? Question mark? In the sense that it makes it sound like the Creator made the Dark One and then locked him up in Shaiol Ghul. But we know from the Ravens chapter that the mythology is that the dragon locked him up in Shaiol Ghul. And we also know, I think, from the Raven chapter what the Forsaken are supposed to be. So this is less specific than that first added later chapter, and I think suggests slightly different things. And I'm inclined to, I suppose, defer to the Ravens chapter more on this matter than here, but who's to say? But Matt goes on, he says he's never been so scared and he doesn't mind admitting to it. But basically, particularly because of Matt's reputation as being a prankster, a little bit of a troublemaker, no one really believes him. No one really believes that he saw anyone. Most people who hear it think it's a prank. So it actually brings him some comfort that Rand saw it as well, and it brings Rand some comfort. So that's good. And while Matt would like, now that there's two to go tell people, Rand, he thinks Matt's reputation would likely be more of a hindrance than a help toward convincing folks. Then Matt gets caught by Tam, and Tam sort of forcefully, kind of humorously, ropes him into helping with the cider barrels. Then the mayor mentions that a Glee Man has come to town. Yay! Exciting! I guess they don't come out this way very frequently, particularly of late with the weather being what it is. So it sounds like the fact that they got a Gleeman, which I presume is a kind of bard. They talk about a couple of instruments. This is certainly going to be a Beltane to be remembered for years. But something strange occurred with it. He had arrived in the dead of the night and was pounding on the door. So something strange is going on there. And then we also learn that the mayor had sent for fireworks. Very exciting. Again, I'm sort of thinking of that first Lord of the Rings chapter with Gandalf and the fireworks and the festival, the birthday party, the good times. But the peddler has not arrived with them yet. I assume the peddler's dead, but any number of things could happen. He could come in at the last minute. We'll see. Again, like these levels of ominousness just keep building. The mayor cautions Sen Bui not to go telling people about the missing fireworks, and Rand expresses essentially why it would be wise not to tell anyone about the fireworks, which is to say, fireworks are a big, big deal. It's going to get people very, very excited, just like the Glee Man, even more so than the Glee Man. So for a rumor to spread only for it to not be true would be devastating in equal measure. And this impresses the mayor, who indicates that Rand will be on the council one day. So then Matt agrees to help with the barrels. It's the right thing to do. Good guy. And he says, maybe Egwene is around. Watching you stare at her like a pole-axed ox will be as good as a badger any day. And that pretty much explicitly tells us that it's not Egwene who has a crush on Rand and is pestering him all the time, making him uncomfortable. It seems to be that Rand has a crush on Egwene, and he's awkward AF. So, very cute. He kind of hopes that she isn't there, and the two start to take in the barrels. End chapter. Very ominous, very exciting, lots of questionable things going on, and the stage certainly seems to be set for things to come to a head in a way. I think that's all I've got for now. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time. Okay, thanks, bye.